Sahanavadu, Sahanavavatu, Sahanau Bhunaktu, Saha Viryam Karavavahai, Tejasvinavaditam Astu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May that one protect us both, nourish us both, that is in our learning and our studies. May we work together with great energy. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily disagree or cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So, I await your questions with bated breath.
Swamiji, I have a quick question, just until other people prepare. I was wondering about these vagaries of mind and how we feel from day to day. There are days in which we are content and peaceful and in the exact same environment. And there are days in which we are just full of fear and anxiety, and even hard to justify because we are in the exact same environment, the same situation, but the way we react, there seems to be some sort of a background of anxiety, and it's hard to explain. I'm wondering, one, where does this come from? And two, what can we do about it? Because it's basically the same practice, but some days it works and some others it doesn't. So how can we adjust our practice to deal with that? Especially in the context of work, where it's hard to spend more time in meditation or more time. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, so it's a good question. We shouldn't expect things to go smoothly all the time because the nature of life is not like that. What do I mean by life? I mean the presented scene in front of us to which we react, and our immediate reaction is always from the habit level initially, when the habit level itself reforms with continued practice. And of course, our first reaction becomes different. It becomes more to do with the nature that we have cultivated in the conscious area of the mind. So we have to make a kind of checklist. So the first thing on our checklist is, are we getting enough sleep? And if we're getting enough sleep, are we preoccupied with the activities of the day, work? And if we are not preoccupied at home with it, are we preoccupied with other things? And then the third thing on the checklist is, do you have a practice which is steady? Is it the same time every day? Is it of the same quality? And then the next thing on your checklist is, every day, am I increasing the quality of my practice? Now, what do we mean by practice? By practice, I mean two things. Most of our life is not to do with meditation. Most of our life is to do with dealing with all the scenes, all the fractions in front of us, all the fragments split up into the varieties familiar to us of people and places and events. And how much does that impact our individuality? So we've all done, a personal development course that we call Enneagram Essence of Truth. But you see, we have to revalue, and I mentioned this last night, the personality as a kind of multifaceted instrument where we can deal with life in an easy, natural, delightful way. And that's difficult to grasp initially, but we have to practice that point of view. Difficult because if we're not careful, we'll get bogged down with the negativity of the world. And then our reason says that we can't really deal with everything all at the same time. In fact, we can't really deal with anything beyond our our initial field, beyond our particular environment. So what is there in our environment? And is the environment at fault, or is it our reaction that is at fault? And do we have the art of noticing when we have some mood swings, or when we react in irregular ways? Now, don't be despondent. Life is not supposed to be even. So there are supposed to be rocks and stones and hills, as well as valleys and slopes. So the art of noticing, something is happening in the mental field, and then adjusting it, learning to adjust it. Now, we have a wonderful tool to do that. Well, we have several, but they amount to the same thing. We can assert positivity. And it comes in the form of japa. That is repetition, loving repetition, repeating with non-demanding love the sacred name of the highest ideal that we have, or what theology calls God, what devout worshippers call the beloved Lord, or Mother, or whatever attitude you have. So the key is practicing the presence in our daily life. And that means we have to feel the presence. Now, sometimes we don't. Sometimes that will happen. Sometimes there's an absence. Sometimes this is called, the dark night of the soul, is an example of a sense of absence, or a sense of frustration on the one hand, that we can't really get this thorough connection that we have had previously, but difficult to get it back. And so every person, every spiritual aspirant will go through this struggle to get back to what we had. Not for the experience, that's the danger, but just to get back to a profound experience where we found this connectedness. And the more we try, the more we struggle, the less successful we'll be, because spiritual life is not about getting something you don't already have. And so practicing the presence takes various forms. One form is that Supreme is present in me. This is the non-dualistic form of it. Theistic form will be, I am here and this sweet lover or beloved is my constant companion, is my resource, is my benefactor, and all of these kinds of things can go on. And then what about when things get in the way? Work. Well, we still can do that. In human love, love develops and matures. And the passionate couple that was there in youth learn to be comfortable in each other's company, and they can sit at home and do separate activities in the same room and still feel connection. And so we, despite the fact that our attention is drawn toward activities, there are some practical things we can do. Because although all the activities in the day feels like a flow of activities, they are really unit activities. There's no such thing as doing everything at one time. You can't read all the words on a book simultaneously. Even though you may be a speed reader, you'll still be doing one page at a time, or at least minimum one paragraph. We don't have to read one sentence. We can get a reading of one word. We can surely do the same thing at a glance with a paragraph. We can train ourselves to do that, speed reading. Before an activity, there is a space. We can occupy that space with divine love and appreciation, prayerfulness. And at the end of activity, there's another opportunity between that termination of the activity and the beginning of the next activity. And you can put something in there. You can put something into the midday, as well as the morning and the evening. And before you go to bed, there's at least 4 occasions where we can think of God. It always reminds me of that tale. Narada, as we know, is a great devotee of Vishnu, and he feels that he's the greatest devotee on the planet Earth. In fact, in the whole universe of many very varied creatures, beings that we know of and beings we do not. And anyway, he's very proud that he is the finest devotee of Vishnu, and Vishnu says to him, but there's one greater than you in his devotion. Who is that? And he gives him some telepathic insight, some kind of heavenly insight. And before them is a vision of a farmhouse. And there's the farmer getting up very, very early in the morning. And he sits down and he dedicates some minutes to the Lord. And then he goes off, he sets off to the fields, he works hard the whole day. His wife brings him some food, he eats the food, he thinks of God before that. And then at the end of a busy day, busier than you can ever imagine, toiling, without any rest, goes back home and sits in front of the shrine with the thanks and eats his meal, goes to bed, takes his bath, etc., and so on. And the whole thing is repeated over and over again. And Narada says, well, that's nothing very special about his devotion. And Vishnu has this comment bypassed. He said, oh, one thing you need to do for me, Narada. Here is a vessel, a pot full of oil. Now I want you to travel around the whole galaxy, in fact, the whole of the universe. Only one rule, bring this pot back to me with not one drop spilt. And off he went. And as he came back, he was asked, so how many times did you think of me? Says Vishnu. Narada said, how could I? I was concentrating on not spilling a drop of this oil. He says, you see, even this farmer, in the midst of all his diversions, all his activities, with so many demands on his time, at least he thought of me some 3 times. Even if he had done it once, he would have been a greater devotee than you. So when we have our minds full of clutter, occupied with all these things, we are mentally displacing the divine. When we incorporate and integrate the divine into all our activities, either by dedicating the activities to the divine, or by making the divine your companion in the work, or by feeling that divine grace is flowing through multiple heads and hands and eyes and all the forms, all the so-called fragmentary pieces in the universe. And that includes this thing that you call I. Now, if you call on somebody's name, the person, you will catch their attention straight away. Supposing you see a friend in the street and the friend doesn't recognize you, you call and wave your hand, and the person's attention gets caught and they come up to you, oh, a conversation starts. So supposing we are able to repeat the divine name, it's called a mantra, a protecting thought. Protecting against what? Protecting against dissociation with the divine, maintaining a connectedness. We do this with feeling. We get into the habit of doing it, constantly repeating it. So japa can be used in 2 different ways. In your waking life, repetition of a mantra, that is the practice of japa, is really there to practice the presence. It's really there to keep your mind sustained with the divine presence that never leaves you. It's in the very pulse that you feel when you feel your pulse, in the very heartbeat that echoes itself inside the pulse, in the very digestive system, in the air that you breathe, in the supply of the air, and so on. You can make a kind of association with everything in the universe, and you'll see it is some kind of unity, united principle, being displayed, seemingly fragmented and looking like parts in space, moving in time. But it is all the divine. To really understand that, we have to understand and entrench our philosophy. And so listening to talks like this or question answer sessions is all useful and helpful. Reading scripture is useful and helpful, and practicing whatever you can in terms of spiritual practice, dividing the day up so that the mind's attention can at least be driven amidst difficult activities, and when you see that the mood is taking a depression somehow, then don't take it seriously. It's part of life. You'll observe it, you'll be patient with it, you'll allow it a little time, and you'll introduce something much more useful inside it and repeat it with positive words and phrases. Every quality with meaning that you express, that quality comes to you. So I'm known for repeating these words of strong and true and wise and full and free and beauty and goodness and love and harmony. But the key to it is to do it not out of necessity. In other words, not when a difficulty arises. That's fine. But do it when the mind is not particularly occupied with anything. Get into the habit of thinking like this constantly, all the time, without any let up. In other words, you're a guardian of a gate of the mind, and you're careful what to let in, and you're careful what to let out. You're careful about what to keep and what to throw away, and it's entirely up to you. It's a game like that. It shouldn't be an exhausting game. It should be a delightful game because you're not doing it alone. Your thought current, so-called, is not yours at all. You have no right to claim it. It's a current that is supplied at a substation, divine substation called the mind. And you are in a beautiful position of being an angel that distributes for these wonderful divine graces and qualities for the welfare of all those beings around you and more. So we have to take it like that. We have to take stock and don't be worried. Accept that. There will be ups and there will be downs. But the down motion is a clue that we can put something positive and meaningful in there and elevate the mood again. Like shifting a gear in the car in a manual gear shift change system where the lowest gear is there and skillfully you take it to the next highest and the next highest, and so it goes on. And whenever the necessity is for slowing down, you do it, you change down, but you are careful to change up again and keep it going like that. So this is really the game of life. So the use of japa and mantra, this is one of its uses. Now there's a second use, that when you are deliberately doing practice by sitting in meditation, you will always do japa. And the power of japa is immense. The japa is recommended highly by all those skilled saints, all those accomplished devotees. And it is an essential part of spiritual practice. So although collectively we talk about, say, morning practice as meditation practice, what we're really talking about is prayer, japa, and meditation. I was at a meeting today discussing with a Buddhist. He said, in our practice, he was talking about Zen Buddhism. In our practice, we don't really use mantras. I know some Buddhist practices use it, but ours does not. Does yours? And I said, well, we have 4 approaches, not just the one. And these 4 approaches will employ mantras, not as a meditation, but as a preparation of the mind for it, as a kind of means to open up our spiritual gateways, to let divine grace flow in. So repeating the divine name during these dedicated periods has a different purpose. When we do japa, first thing we are doing is we are mentally feeling that our teacher, our guru is in front of us giving this mantra. And the mantra carries with it a sacred sound, a sacred energy. And we can imagine the whole lineage, something like a pipeline going back to a fluid divine, full of grace, overflowing with it. And we make a mental salutation to all of those. We make a mental salutation to all those saints and sages across the whole range of religions. And finally, a salutation to how we view the divine perfection, or devotees call the Supreme Lord or God. And then that special name for God, or name for the highest presence, we then take that and we repeat it in such a way that we are settling the mind. We are introducing with deep feeling a system of thought that worships, a system of thought that delights, a system of thought that automatically displaces any negativity. And when we do this, it is expressive. It's an invitation. Please enter into my heart through all the various layers and levels of existence. Inside, internally, is the heart. That is the core of our being. And inviting the person in there, come, come, come. Yes, you send an invitation out. Naturally, you'll use somebody's name if you do it. Will you come? Will you visit me on Saturday and grace me with your presence? Okay, fine. So that happens, and then you say, okay, now you can enter into this house, and you can enter into the interior throne room where I have prepared a golden throne for you. Please be seated. Be seated so that I have a sufficient time and opportunity to wash your feet, to offer you some food, to garland you with the most fragrant flowers that come from you, but never mind. You're smiling and accepting it, expressing love, you see. See, on every year, there's something called the Valentine's Day. By the way, we have the relics of St. Valentine here in Dublin. And typically, people give each other flowers. Now, I heard somebody once say, well, you give flowers to me once a year, maybe twice, once on my birthday and once on a special day. But why not every day? See, that would be better, don't you think? So on 300 days or 350 days of the year, you fight. And on the remaining days of the year, you offer flowers and make up and talk sweetly. Well, what kind of relationship is that? So it's to express yourself sweetly by using the special name of the divine. And this is a private joke I'm telling, but there's one of you here who knows, and you'll know what I'm talking about, that God's personal private name is actually Howard. I won't go into that. So I'll tell the joke later if you like. But right now, we won't want to deviate from the subject matter. So that's the other use of the japa. And what we're doing is we're preparing the mind. In the case of meditation, we're preparing the mind for a sacred visitor who is there already, but we only realize that once we've invited the person. And then during the day, the use of japa is to practice the presence of the divine, to keep them in mind constantly. So this is the wonderful this is the wonderful practice that can be done to keep the mind tuned in to the glory of the divine. That's all we have to do. Now, of course, we've heard of spiritual practice in terms of austerities, that is self-controls. And of course, it all comes down to the queen bee of everything else, which is the mind itself. So how to control the mind? The Bhagavad Gita gives us some clues. The 17th chapter divides everything into a threefold faith and applies to everything, including food. 3 kinds of food are mentioned. 3 kinds of worship are mentioned. And 3 kinds of austerity, or 3 kinds of austerity are mentioned. But let's pick up the idea of food. We all have to eat. Let's pick up the idea of sleep. We all have to sleep. And for most people, we all have to work. So these are some activities that if they're not done in any kind of deliberate, conscious, mindful, and sacred way, we've missed a great opportunity to take an ordinary, everyday necessity and convert it, as we will, transform it into something of the highest value. But let's have a look at this threefold austerity. We call it tapasya. And it's put in a peculiar way, which requires some explanation. Deva Dviya Guru Prajna Pujanam Socham Ajrivam. We have to worship the devas now. We have to be careful about language, because deva is unfortunately translated as gods or deities. Like the word deity would come from the same root. So what do we mean by that? Are we a polytheistic kind of religion? Do we think that there are many, many gods? Very difficult if you're brought up in a monotheistic religion, emphasizing that, to think that you have to worship many, many gods. And this Bhagavad Gita is a universal text. It's supposed to cater for everybody. And so we have to understand what is meant. What is meant is this. Underlying all the existence that we have are the arrangement of divine graces that appear in waves, just lying underneath the surface and coming up. And their arrival on the surface is what we call our world. This we have to be absolutely thoroughly convinced about. And once we're convinced about it, we now worship the entire ocean that is bubbling up and coming up and expressing itself as our world. But we don't often value it. We only think this person is a nuisance. Or I like to use my ears to hear words of praise. I don't like to hear words that are disparaging. I don't like to hear criticism. I like to see beautiful sights. I don't like to see sights which don't agree with my visual sense of aesthetics. And so it goes on. So what we mean by these devas, these divine graces that really appear as the universe itself, the sum total of the relative world. So worship has to be there. Now, what form will that take? What is worship? Worship means expressing something. And so it's not to do with ritual, it's to do with expressing something. Now, in the various philosophies, we can see, I don't know if you're aware of, but there are kind of twins of philosophy or philosophical schools, Nyaya and Vaisheshika, for example. Samkhya and Yoga go together. And then there's Purva Mimamsa, Uttar Mimamsa, or what is called Vedanta. But of these, Purva Mimamsa is based on the ritualistic portion of the Vedas. It might be called the kind of philosophy of ritualism. And so the teachings of this school are embodied in short aphorisms by Jaimini. And Jaimini is supposed to be their author. Now he holds that the Vedas, not merely their teachings, are spiritual laws and principles. He says that even their very words, the words of the scripture, are all mantras and they're all eternal according to that school of thought. The words of the Vedas are uncreated. So they're enduring, continuously enduring. They're uncreated. And the connection between a word and the object that is named by it or represented by it, between the sound and the sense, that is in fact eternal according to that philosophy. So underneath all these actions and these objects of ritualism is really one entity appearing as all these various waves. And then the twice born, that is, those people who are predominantly responsible for the smooth running of society, including those people who are leading an elevated life as teachers or as ritualistic priests, or those uplifting missionaries who have the capacity to inspire whole generations by their words. Anybody who has a flavor of dedication and sanctity, we worship those people also. And so the twice born and the teachers and the wise also. You have people who are learned but not necessarily wise. You can see people who have tremendous spiritual power because they're highly energetic and can express it. They're good speakers, they're good musicians, they can inspire people by their demeanor, by the field that they set up around themselves, magnetic field that they set up. Orators fall into this category and so on. But we have to recognize this is one divinity behind them. And so this is the idea. We have to dedicate some time to worship. This may even be of a simple ritualistic type, offering a flower, offering a leaf, offering some water, giving a genuine, deep expression of the heart in front of a shrine, in your home, say. And then there's cleanliness, simplicity, continence, and non-injury. Now, I'm going to take the subject of simplicity. The Japanese have learned the art of simplicity in their culture. Everything is minimalistic and everything is so beautifully laid out in its simplicity. And we have fallen into a trap possibly in our modern society of too much complexity. That clouds the mind. And if that clouds the mind, it's not surprising that we find adjusting very difficult. The other day, somebody was telling me they had a 30-minute conversation and they were talking about how difficult their job was. Imagine, for 30 minutes. And then they wondered, I don't know why I'm in a depression. Well, yes, for 30 minutes you've been talking to yourself in a negative way. Naturally, that'll stick. And if you talk to yourself like this for 30 minutes, at least minimally for 31 minutes, you should have another conversation, even with yourself, which is highly positive. And then we have to preserve our energy well. We have to make sure that we don't even think of any injurious thought. These are really to do with the practices of the body. And then we have speech. So we see that words that cause no offense, that has to be cultivated. Even internal words that don't cause any offense. These words have to be truthful and faithful to the highest truth that is within us, and pleasant and beneficial. I have to say, having just, let's say, recently come back from France, and the people greet each other so enthusiastically. The bonjour is an upbeat statement, accompanied by a smile. It's not just mere politeness. There's a kind of warmth that goes with it in the tone of voice that is being expressed. So, given the option, why don't we use our speech to elevate the mind of the other? We cannot do it unless we use that same speech to elevate our own mind. It is wonderful to speak pleasant things and beneficial things, sweet things, and leave out the negatives. And also regular recitation of scriptures. As part of spiritual practice, we have to take up a book. What kind of book? Not a novel or something, but some writing that inspires us. Now we're living in a multimedia age, so it could be something that we hear also, and something that is something like a video on something. We could do that. Anything that inspires the mind and elevates the mind, this will be in terms of speech and recitation of scriptures, recitation of psalms, recitation of mantras, japa, and so on. So all of this is to regulate the speech. I have a philosophy, you see. If I disagree with somebody, I tend to keep quiet, unless it's a highly serious thing. And so where I disagree, I say nothing. Where I agree, then I state it and agree, and I say yes, and I be agreeable. And then what about the mind? We have to cultivate a level of serenity of this. We have to cultivate the qualities of gentleness, but silence is the most important thing. Now we're going to do a retreat. Some of you are booked on it in June, end of June, or 23rd, 24th, 25th June. It's only, let's say, 2.5, 3 days maximum. And there's a silent retreat. Now there are some retreats, like Vipassana retreats, that are there for 10 days and there's total silence. And even 10 days is a shrunken form of the original kind of practice of a kind of retreat. So for 9 days, you cannot talk. On the 10th day, you can talk to ask questions or something like that. But for 9 solid days, nothing. Now, if you practice that, you'll see that the mind stops chattering away. It settles down and starts enjoying the serenity of no noise. But we've gotten so used to noise, this will naturally disturb the mind. The noise comes into the mental field in 2 ways. Firstly, it is a replay of a clutter of events, a clutter of scenes. It's like being in a noisy marketplace. You can't hear yourself talk, you can't hear yourself think even, and there are all kinds of things going on around you, and it's okay for a while, but after some time, it is just noise assaulting the ears. There are 2 ways of playing music, you know. One is an assault on the ears, and the other is drinking in audial nectar to elevate the soul. So silence is something that we're not necessarily used to. And you can imagine 9 days on these Vipassana retreats of complete silence and meditating for something like 5-hour batches at a stretch, broken by some break where you stretch and walk. But even the walk is mindful. And the next thing is self-control, purity of heart. That's equivalent to saying, I won't exert my self-image. I won't exert my sense of individuality. I'll leave it, I'll drop it for the time being. Now, these are deemed to be the highest cultivation of austerities. There are other austerities belonging to the category of rajasic and tamasic. But naturally, if I'm telling you, the idea is to displace rajas and tamas, so that sattva dominates, purity of the mind dominates, then really you have theoretically salvation if there's just a marginal increase in the unconscious mind. Then you'll notice it. So, just to summarize, I started telling us about Jaimini's Purva Mimamsa, and this was in relation to the great quality necessary in repeating and reciting your mantra. in Indian philosophy, of course, mind is only subtle matter. Matter is a gross mind, and they are all made from subtle energies or matter. And that is Akasha was the first of the 5 elements, and then Vayu and so on, all of these helplessly translated, unfortunately. But the mental concept of an object is a modification of the mind. So all the things that tend to impact us in the environment are actually all, according to the system, products of the mind, projection of the mind, temporary manifestations of the mind. And this is why in spiritual systems, we call this manifestation by name and form, namarupa. There is a form that is externally recognized, but there's a subtle version inside called nama, naming. And mantra and repetition of solid and positive virtues is really a part of repeating concepts with an element of feeling. The feeling has to be there, though. And doing that in our regular practice, knowing how and when to do dedicated japa, and getting the habit of saying it constantly all the time. My guru was asked, how many times should we repeat our mantra? He said, never stop. 24 hours of the day. 24 hours of the day. Because we always need protection. We need to keep our insurance policy up to date. So these 2 aspects are there, and the nama is really the sound embodiment of what we gather to be, in some way, to the worshipper, an external agent. But really what it is this profound connection, getting connection. It's like a switch. The mantra is like a switch, or like a keyhole. You put your eye to the keyhole, you see, if it's a walled garden, you might see that small, small avenue of light opens a vision of an entire garden. But there'll always be a barrier unless you open the door and go through. And so the mantra is the key of this door. So always repeat it. So I hope some of these recommendations and practices are useful and helpful to you.
Thank you, Swami.
There is in front of me some questions and answers that I always keep in reserve to and from Swami Purnananda. And so one answer goes like this. Human life, he says, is unpredictable. It may end after 20 years or today. Nobody knows when it will end. So it's better to acquire something soon for the journey. Who knows when the call will come? If you go to an unknown land empty-handed, you'll suffer. Because you were born, you must die. It is true, after death, you'll have to go to a different place. At any cost, collect all provisions for that journey and keep yourself ready. When the call comes, start your journey with a smiling face. There will be no fear or anxiety if you know definitely that you have what you need for the way. And when you have the noble desire, as you all do have here now, to realize God and an opportunity to lead a good life, please use it wholeheartedly and attain the truth. And he uses the example, many times it's there, and Ramakrishna also asks and makes this analogy of a pole and a child catching it and swinging around, and the centrifugal force will fling the person off if they're not careful. You have to hold the pole tightly. So he says, hold the pole, that is God, firmly, and let the body go, but don't give up the pole. Have faith in yourself. I'm a human being and I can do everything. Have the kind of faith and move forward. You'll reach the goal. Your life will be meaningful. Coming and going are painful. Stop this dreadful cycle of rebirths, reincarnations. Be the Lord's eternal companion. Remove all fear and weakness from your mind. Never debase yourself by thinking about sin or debasing yourself with self-criticism. What a pity. Replace it with what a glory. Sin, however great it may seem in the eyes of man, is nothing in the eyes of God. One glance of his can uproot sins of millions of births in a moment. And in order to divert human beings from the path of sin, the scriptures mention heavy punishments for the sinner, no doubt. Of course, every action bears a result, and evil actions disturb one's peace of mind. So I hope that further clarifies. Any more questions? Any more questions? That was a useful question. Thank you. I hope the answer was equally useful. We just have to be vigilant, you see, and understand, when there is some kind of dip, and I was doing so well, and now what happened today? Yes, okay. It happens like that. Steady practice, you get back to some basics, some fundamentals. You know, the human constitution is very delicate. It doesn't take much to upset our balance. We have to learn to balance properly, to balance nicely. In the 1960s, 1970s, there was a band of musicians. Now, one man, as was the fashion, he wanted to take up a guitar and play it. And then he realized he could not play the guitar as beautifully as the most expert guitar player. So he went into a store and he traded his guitar for a musical instrument. They said, yes, okay, you can do it. What would you like to play? And he had no idea, but on the wall he saw a flute. And immediately he said, I'll take that one. And started rehearsing and self-taught himself how to play this flute. See? Now he had the habit, in a public performance, he had to balance a harmonica and a guitar and so on and so forth. So he was holding the stand with his leg, and people thought, he plays the flute on one leg, and thereafter he made that his trademark. So imagine the balancing required to play and sing and stand on one leg like a flamingo. They called him a flamingo, reminded him of a flamingo. So there it is. So we have to learn to maintain our balance, not be toppled off so easily.
Swami, can I ask one small thing around the element of time? It's related to the last question. If you find yourself in a cycle of unnecessary negative thinking, or you're just not in that space, when does it start to reflect externally? What is the time element in that change and how we see it externally in our world?
Are you asking how does negativity manifest in the world as a circumstance for you?
I mean, but if you're not doing, say you're doing really well, but then you have a dip for a period of time, is that reflected externally, or what? Like, how much time do we build up in terms of before it doesn't show? I'm just thinking about when I'm not in a space, maybe in the past, and externally things have shown me that they've got chaotic, or
supposing you learn a new language and you use it for a long time, let's say a few months, and then you come back from your foreign holiday, having used this language fluently, and you don't use it for about a year. How easy is it for you to get back to your fluency of your foreign language that you learned? Not easy. And so it's all a question of practice. And if you're out of practice, even for a moment, you have to get back into it as quickly as possible And you have to keep it up. Ramakrishna's language for it is, there's a brass pot, you have to keep it polished all the time. You can't just polish it once and leave it. So this polishing of the mind has to be done all the time. And you know yourself when the polishing is a little bit tardy. As soon as you notice that, you have to get back and do some cleaning. Don't leave it. It's like if your car is veering off to the left, you don't wait for a year to correct it. You correct it there and then. Learn the art of correcting it now. Don't allow yourself to get into the ditch.
Thank you, Swami.
The effects are immediate. If you lapse your meditation and japa for one day for any reason, the next day is very difficult to get back into it. Now, this is so great a person as Holy Mother herself mentioned it. Said, you see, if that regularity of practice is missing, it'll be very difficult to get back into it. It's a question of forming a habit. So if you have the capacity to learn a new language, you learn it and you keep rehearsing. You don't just leave it on the bookshelf for another year and say, oh, I know the language. No. You have to keep it up. Like yoga, see, you have to practice and keep it up and learn the principles. And learn your range, by the way, and don't exceed your range, as you know. Progressively, gently, progressively. You do it without any guilt, without any fear. Easy and naturally, you do it. All right, good.
Thank you, Swami.
Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thanks.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji. Bye, everybody. Bye, Jill. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, Swamiji.